Martha Lesher, and I too appreciate everyone for coming out tonight. It's a great show. I also have a question about the construction of the dike in terms of location. Beth Crawford also brought the question up in your 5 minutes earlier in the evening. The dike is right along the road, just a few feet from Lakes Road. And then when it cuts across, it's just a few feet from Beverly. And then, of course, it had to go behind the schools, which I understand. But I don't know why it stayed so far back and created this questionable area for the police station. Why it wasn't built up near Beverly like the previous run of the dike was on Lakes in Beverly?
Can you slide number 3, please?
So which slide was that, Claire?
Slide 3, it says
Slide 3?
ALR exclusion map.
Technical difficulties. Did I just get the okay? Okay. We have some fantastic technicians working with us this evening. They've been working very hard since the very beginning. But I can't see them because they're in the shadows, and I don't know why things aren't working right now. Except to blame gremlins. It must be the rain. Okay, are we going to get that slide? You can still answer the question, I believe.
I can't really answer it without a proper map to show people,
Okay.
you know, what we're talking about and what we were envisioning and what what actually happened and how it relates. Here we go.
There we go.
Okay, so like the person said, we followed the backside of the school to make sure this stayed dry. This is school district offices, we stayed behind that. The municipality actually bought this piece of land. It was about 28 acres. That was not in the Somenos conservation area, and it's something that we might want to consider to manage as part of the greater size of the marsh. But when we got to here, which is York Road, the dike was intended to go around the private property, the Fun Pacific property, and then it was going to come down here and it was going to head up along Beverly. When we submitted our application, we wanted $6 million, and we ended up getting 4.8. So we had to save $1.2 million on the whole project that went down here and then down Lakes. One of the decisions that was made is, could we get Fun Pacific to agree to cut their property in half, or not half, 8 acres here, 5 acres there, and then shoot across this way to reduce the distance. The thinking of staff, and we worked with the Integrated Flood Management Group, which includes North Cowichan, City of Duncan, Cowichan Tribes, and who have I missed? CVRD, was that this was a good alignment to meet the objective. The thinking was that this one here was just under 5 acres. This one here was 5 acres. And so the idea was that for the Somenos Marsh, the greater area, that there was no net loss in marsh lands, because the municipality was going to, under the ALR inclusion applications, acquire this property, which would mean that the municipality owns all this all the way down here and can manage it for the good of the marsh. So whether we agree or not with that decision, to go straight across, that was the rationale we used.
Thank you.
Thank you, Martha. Microphone number 1.
Good evening. My name is Catherine Swan, and nothing to do with my name being a bird's name, but I think that doing anything to hurt Somenos Marsh would be a really big mistake. I don't live near the marsh. I have nothing to lose or gain because of my view or anything like that, but I go down to it a lot. And I'm an immigrant here of a dozen years here only, and it seems to me, and excuse me if I repeat something the scientist said because I got here late, but when you go there, the first thing you see is that Somenos Marsh is designated as an IBA, an important bird area. Was that already said? So how could our governments take something, there's only 84 of them in BC, and one of them is Somenos Marsh, because it is so important to the birds and the rest of all the wildlife. How could our government even consider doing it unless they're going to put the police station and the hospital and everything else on stilts? I think we should leave IBAs alone and get creative to solve the problem. And there are birders all over the place that come to IBAs. They spend their money in town. They certainly wouldn't be at all happy to know that our IBA was messed with by the people that perhaps don't enjoy birds or don't understand wildlife, and numbers and figures are far more important. But after all, it's life, and that leaving that life to thrive adds to the wealth and the richness of our lives. Thank you.
Would anyone on the panel care to respond to that? Yeah, Don?
Yeah. It's working? Well, I think what we're hearing here is very instructive. There's a totally different tone coming from you in the audience and from the staff and the politicians. They talk about legal boundaries. What the hell's a legal boundary of a marsh? The marsh doesn't have one of those things. The politicians shouldn't be walking on eggs, figuring out how to just push the marsh in to the legal boundary. Instead, they should be thinking, how do we enlarge that marsh because it's such a functioning lung of our community. Anyway, I just wanted to point that out, that we're talking right past one another. That's the difficulty we have all the time.
Anyone else care to respond to that? Okay. We'll take it to microphone number 2.
Good night, my name is Sandrine Coble, and I really want to thank you for being here because this is my first time to ever speak to you, and I hope really tonight that you're listening. The democratic process is that you got elected, John, and therefore I hope that you can represent us as well. Before this new dike was built, I actually sent an email to North Cowichan asking for an info night. And, thinking, I saw this is being built. This is going to affect my neighborhood. And I asked you guys for an info night. And I expected something was going to happen, and, it didn't. Anyways, so I'm very grateful to the Somenos Marsh Society for that. Canadian Tire, the old Canadian Tire store came up, and you should have taken it. It was right there. It had a garage and everything. Couldn't that have been your RCMP station? It was right by the highway. Yeah, Rona. Okay, Rona. Okay, so now we've received our new letters in the mail. And I'm a lucky person. My house is above the flood level, but I'm still concerned for my neighbors. My question is, how did you figure out the new 200-year flood level? And then I saw Clay, I saw you at the marsh with a whole bunch of people, which was great to see that you were working with lots of other people too. So you found a new way to dredge the creek and stuff, and you're gonna put the sludge somewhere. So I would like to know, where is the sludge going? And Thank you for not building the new proposed dike. I'm glad you're not going to build that. And last was, I get one of Beth's questions, which is, how are you going to address the people who have houses that are now still in that 200-year floodplain, and when those houses were bought and built, they were not in a 200-year floodplain, and we would like to know the answer to that. Thank you so much for listening.
Could we have map number 4, please?
Yes. Good job.
Wow, that was fast.
Good job.
Okay. Yeah, actually, I'm gonna use your mic this one here. Hi, Sandrine. Thank you very much for showing up. I understand your questions are, how did we come to the new levels? Where is the quote-unquote sludge going from creek dredging? And how are we going to, or what are we going to do for the folks who are still flooding? Is that correct? Okay. With respect to the new levels, what's happened is when we first conceived of the flood construction levels, it was quite some time ago, about 3 years ago, 2 to 3 years ago. And at that time, we didn't have a good feel for what was going to happen downstream of the Somenos-Cowichan confluence. And the issue there is that there's a couple of dikes, one on the north side of the river and one on the south side of the river. Unfortunately, I don't have a plan that shows them. But they're downstream, and what happens is those two dikes cause a problem with water levels. It actually increases water levels upstream. Now, since the point where those dikes have been built, or since the time that we built the new dikes, we've determined that the flood levels can come down because one of the dikes, the one on the south side, that we thought might be constructed next to the river has actually been set back, so that helps reduce water levels. We're hoping that the Quamachin dike, which was discussed in the Integrated Flood Management Plan, as one that should not be raised, will actually hold true, and that dike will remain lower. We'd originally assumed that it could go up in height at some future date. So the combination of those two things allowed us to redo the hydraulics and determine that we could take the flood levels down another 0.3 meters. So that's how we got to the new flood level. We have a letter from the consultant, the hydraulic consultant. He's signed off on this, and so we're just waiting for the province to review that letter. As for sludge, I think maybe, I'm not sure what that one's about. We recently removed the beaver dam, but there has been no dredging in the creek that I'm aware of. York Road? I'm not quite sure you're referring to there. But there is no sludge removal anywhere, I can tell you that.
Restoration.
It's a restoration of a dike bank that was put on top of red endangered flowers.
Okay, this is, sorry, a point of clarification. It was a restoration of a flood dike that was put on top of some endangered flowers. David Polster, briefly?
Yeah, the current work that's going on at the Somenos Oak protected area, just towards the creek from there, is being done to protect a rare plant that was damaged many years ago when the creek was dredged and the spoil was placed in a berm beside the creek. That prevented the flooding of this area, which then grew up into willows and reed canary grass, and destroyed the habitat for this rare species, Silocarpus elater. Tall woolly heads is the name of the plant. Anyways, at this point, the idea to reverse that problem that occurred, I don't know, 8 or 10 years ago, entails a significant amount of brushing because the brush has grown up, and breaching that berm that is between the creek and the area where the rare plant should be growing. So that's what that's all about.
Thanks for the clarification, David. Back to you, Clay.
Okay, I believe the third question was what are we going to be doing about those folks along the north bank of Somenos Creek who may still be below the flood level. So we completed our survey. We had a detailed survey done. It took a couple weeks. And the intention now, and I believe we've indicated this in the letters that we've sent out to all of those potentially affected residents, is that we're going to be contacting them shortly to have discussions about the situation with their homes and what the municipality can do in consultation with the homeowners to try to address the flooding issue for those homes. Yeah, John was just pointing out, post our survey, when we initially, we had some initial survey data that we needed to confirm. So initially we thought there were more homes than there really are flooding. So right now, from Lakes Road West, we've identified 3 homes. And there's 5 others in the Rosewood area, all side by side, that are at risk of flooding. So we'll be meeting with all those homeowners.
Okay. Thank you. Over to microphone number 1. Demir.
Good evening, Demir Walliner. I apologize, I'm not familiar with everybody on the panel. Kind of a pre-question. Am I correct in understanding that North Cowichan is the only municipality represented up there this evening?
Yes.
All right, so that goes to my main question, which is over the past couple of years, at the impetus of the problems we're having with the Cowichan River, there's an increasing understanding through the community that water control is not something that can be handled in isolation, that we need to approach these problems as a community. So I'm looking at that map and I see the city of Duncan and I see other parts of the CVRD. My question is, was this like a North Cowichan special, or were other parts of the CVRD and city of Duncan involved in this? Yeah.
As was previously explained, the Integrated Flood Management Plan had 4 partners, the CVRD, Cowichan Tribes, North Cowichan, and the City of Duncan. You asked if we're the only ones on the panel tonight. Yes, but we did have partners, and North Cowichan is the biggest municipality and has more staff, and therefore our staff are intimately involved in building the dikes. But it is a partnership.
Okay, so it would be fair to say that the CVRD signed off on this?
Of course, yes, they were a partner.
Okay,
and there were dikes involving electoral areas, and the dikes protect parts of Duncan as well.
Okay, thank you.
Any further explanation, Dave?
Well, I just wanted to point out that, you asked if who signed off. The municipality of North Cowichan, the city of Diking, the Cowichan Tribes, and CVRD all signed off on the Diking plan along Beverly and Lakes.
Thank you. Okay, over to microphone number 2. The long awaiting. There we go. Thank you for your patience.
Thank you, Tamara, and thank you, everybody. My name is Sheila Jones. I come from a couple of different scenarios. First of all, my brother is retired RCMP, so I respect the fact that they all need a new place. I've been fortunate enough to tour the whole inside of the building. I've been in the jail cells. I've had conversations. Yeah, they need a new place. But I know, because I've been following, that they don't need to go in the marsh. There's other places that they can go. I came from a town 6 years ago that had the same problem, not the floods, but it was too small. They built up. The RCMP went places. They kept the services. They built up. They're fine. They're doing just really well. So that ties in with, we need to have the marsh. We need to have the lands. I'm a holistic practitioner. Part of what I do is I heal pets, I heal critters and creatures. I rescue one at a time old dogs in medical need, heal them and keep them till their end. I don't do dying. I don't do dead. The other day I was walking up my street and there was a little baby garter snake crawling across the sidewalk, going out to the road. I picked him up and I took him back. There was a little creature. He was going to die out in the middle of the road. I have saved honeybees. They're floundering. I go in my house and I get a spoonful of honey and I feed them and they fly away. I've saved a moth flying and floating in the water. I pick him up, I dry him off, and he can go fly away. Whoever in the world told the bureaucrats, and I speak with utmost respect, whoever in the world told bureaucrats and whoever behind the scenes of killing little creatures, taking away their homes, whoever said that was the right thing to do?
Thank you, Sheila. Anyone care to respond to this? We'll take it over to microphone number 1.
Hi, my name's Diana Hardacre, and I absolutely hate speaking in public. I'm nervous as hell, and I don't want to be here, but I have to speak up for nature, because nature doesn't seem to have its own voice. I'm very fortunate that I get to teach students at the Nanaimo River Fish Hatchery twice a year about nature. Very sadly, they have a lot to learn. But the other thing that I'm teaching them is to be respectful of nature and how very important it is that we recognize its value and protect it whenever possible. The Somenos Marsh deserves our protection. All of the creatures that live there and migrate to and from it, what it does for us in cleansing the water and purifying our air, it is invaluable. Please, don't mess with the marsh. Thank you.
Is there someone else on microphone number 2?
Hello everyone. Thank you for the Somenos Marsh Society for putting this on tonight. My name is Tracy Fleming. I have the privilege and the honor of working for Cowichan tribes. Tim is one of my co-workers, and I've had the privilege of working with Tim's uncle, Jim, over the last couple of years quite closely. I had to take him home tonight because he's not feeling very well. He hasn't been well for a while. But he wanted to say a few words, and he would have if he had the breath to do so. So he asked me to say a few words. Can you adjust that? He has a long history of, obviously, of living in the Cowichan Valley. He said that in his lifetime, actually, the dike levels have been raised 4 times that he's seen. He says that you cannot look at the Somenos watershed in isolation. It is part of a bigger watershed, i.e. the Cowichan watershed. There's lots of activity, particularly forestry, that's happening in the upper Cowichan watershed that is affecting the Cowichan River. The Cowichan River has 2 flows. One is water, one is gravel. Forestry in the upper watershed causes a lot of sediment, including gravel, to go down into the river. Because the river is filling in with gravel, the water level rises. When the water level rises, there's a lot more flooding. That in addition to the Cowichan River being constrained and channelized over the many decades. So when the Cowichan floods and when other conditions are right, floodwaters shoot up into the Somenos system. Tim mentioned this, that the Somenos Creek runs both ways. So we can't look at the Somenos system without looking at the entire watershed. It's all connected. So he just wanted to make that point, and I'm just telling it to you. I hope I said it the way he wanted it to be said. Thank you.
Microphone number 1.
Good evening. Thank you for the opportunity to speak. First of all, I'd like clarification on exactly what land is involved in the ALR removal application. Is it just the Fund Pacific, or is it the Fund Pacific and the additional 5 acres next to it, please?
Certainly, hopefully we can show you that on the map, but there are 2 separate parcels. So the Fund Pacific property, which has a total of 13 acres.
Slide number 3, please.
Yeah, and the North Cowichan owned triangular-shaped piece of property beside it, which you can see on the slide now.
So John, do you want me to?
Sorry, can you
go ahead?
Laser pump?
So this one here is what we've asked to exclude from the ALR. This one here is what the North Cowichan has asked to include into the ALR. This one's about, it says 3.2 hectares, and this one over here is 1.79. So that's the municipal's application, put 2 for 1 in. This one is 8 acres. And so Fund Pacific has agreed in their ALR application that they're going to give this one to the municipality of North Cowichan, 5 acres. It's on the wet side of the dike. This 8 acres would come out. And then up by Avro Creek Vineyard, they're going to put 46 acres in to take those 8 acres out. We had an agrologist study done, and the 46 acres going in is ideal agricultural land for vineyard, and this here was marginal land for agriculture.
So you're talking about up the Avro, you're talking about the end, that big piece of property that's been for sale in Norcross Road for a couple of years?
It's
the one that's underwater 9 months of the year?
No, it's never underwater. This property we're talking about is up by the vineyard, if you know where the Apple Creek Vineyard is, across from the golf course on the other side, up on the mountainside.
Mm-hmm.
It's, so that's the 46 acres that's supposed to go in if that 8 acres comes out.
Okay, so that is a different piece than I'm thinking up on Norcross. If all the partners are involved in this, the CVRD, the Indian Trust, the City of Duncan, who is actually listed on the application for removal? Just the municipality and Fund Pacific, or all those partners?
Yes, I wanted to get this straight. The Diking project is a cooperative effort between the CVRD, the City of Duncan, Cowichan Tribes, and the municipality. The ALR exclusion is strictly a North Cowichan thing. So I don't want to get those 2 things mixed up.
That's why I wanted that clarified. Thank you. I wanted to point out one thing that hasn't been brought up, but somebody, when they mentioned the IBA area. I lived in Shawnigan for 10 years and moved up to Norcross Road just a few years ago. I don't know the effect, I'd have to ask one of the scientists on the board there, but when we moved up from Shawnigan, we had to spend thousands of dollars on blackout blinds because of the light pollution from Cowichan Commons. In the middle of the night, I could get up at 2 or 3 o'clock in the morning and see my shadow on the floor from the light. If you develop this area, the police station, I expect there's going to be major light. And now I hear tonight about a hospital. I can't help but believe all that light pollution would have some detriment on the IBA area. Could you comment on that, please?
Who among us would like to speak to the effect on the international bird area, or the important bird area, sorry.
I don't mind speaking to the hospital concept. The CVRD is responsible for identifying a possible new hospital site. They work with the Hospital Foundation, and they work with the VHA on that. The University Village planning process has identified that if there is a hospital in the University Village area, which is all of this area here, this broader area, that certainly that will have an impact on the downtown, and we would need to plan for it. One of the sites that had been put out there was the current high school site. If the high school moved into this area here, no other sites have really been discussed, but there has been some rumor and discussion that the old school district site could be a possible one, but there is no, the CVRD hasn't considered that, they haven't looked at that, and I just know that they're going through a process where they want to develop some criteria on where a hospital could go. So I think we're way ahead of ourselves thinking that a hospital is going in the downtown area.
Just
The question was to one of the scientists on the effect of light pollution in that area, whether it's possible to leave.
That's fine. I'm not a scientist, so I'm not answering that one.
Brian?
It wouldn't affect salmon.
Wouldn't affect salmon. Salmon don't fly. Okay?
I apologize as a salmon biologist. I don't think I should be the one that speaks to that point.
David?
Yeah, I'm a vegetation ecologist, so I'm not much better. But
We thought we had all our bases covered and we missed the birds. I'm sorry. But perhaps we can have someone follow up on that question. Okay, but Dan Ferguson did have something to say in response to the two questions regarding the agricultural land reserve exemption. Dan, did you want to take a moment?
Yeah. Am I on? Can you hear me? Okay, I'd just like to maybe point out that the land that is up for exclusion, I believe, is Class 1 soils and sub-irrigated. So that means it's some of the best soil types in British Columbia. And the ones being offered up for exchange are on the wet side, as you heard. So they'll be saturated soils and very limited in what they can grow. And mountainside. So I think we should be concerned by the, I think it's kind of a red herring that they're dragging across here and offering something that's probably.
Thanks, Dan. Just sort of as a housekeeping thing, we have reached 9 o'clock, which was our scheduled end time. However, we were 15 minutes late starting, so if I may beg the indulgence of our panelists, are you okay taking a few more questions from the floor? Yeah? Okay. And with our audience, there are still people on the floor. Excellent. So we're just going to go quickly to microphone number 2.
Good evening. My name is Paul Lazenby, and I have a question about rapid runoff and sponges. Because what I see with the new diking system is something that looks an awful lot like a Duncan boat basin. From the high point of the dike towards the center of town, we now have a huge area of runoff, which we didn't have before. The area that's in question, proposed for the RCMP station, which used to drain out to the swamp, now drains in. The schoolyards now drain in. The school board buildings drain in. The Fund Pacific drains in. For every construction project that has been in the area in the last little while, every time someone increased the drainage or increased the drainage flow, they were required to put in a retention pond. Cowichan Bay development up top, rapid runoff needs a retention pond. Cowichan Commons rapid runoff, they needed a retention pond. North Shawnigan Shopping Center, rapid runoff, needs a retention pond. So all of a sudden, we have this situation where North Cowichan and the community have built this really rapid runoff into a small area, and they expect to be able to quickly pump it all back into the river. And every new development that I hear being talked about is more pavement, more roofs, more rapid runoff. Where is the retention pond for the water that's running off the inside of the dike? When Ladysmith had its microburst just a short while ago, they flooded the City Hall. Our weather patterns are changing. We're going to have microbursts. We're going to have floods. Should we ever get an earthquake which damages the Cowichan, the dam at Lake Cowichan, we're going to have massive amounts of water running down the river and alterations of flow. It really looks to me that we didn't build the dike to keep Somenos Marsh out. What we did is we built a boat basin because there's going to be times when you can't get the water out of there as fast as it's coming down. Has anyone made any efforts to consider putting in anything that's going to hold the water back or hold the water out of that area now that you've trapped it?
Let's take that to our technical experts. Which slide would you like? Slide 4, please.
So I'm not entirely sure. Do you want to answer this question, John?
Sure. I don't need a pen. I can talk a little bit about North Cowichan's policies on drainage and drainage retention. So any new development, we have a policy about requiring detention, retention, treatment. So for instance, the Cowichan Commons Mall, there's on top of the Home Depot and the Walmart stores, there's storage of water. When it rains, it's stored on the roof and released gradually to the storm drain system. So what we're trying to do is mimic nature. So trying to mimic what was there before the development. And that's what our policy will be for any new development in North Cowichan, and has been for years.
Okay. A murmur in response. Over to microphone number 1.
Over here.
Oh, sorry, Quinn?
I was just going to answer the other half of the question, which is, I think what I heard was some concerns about dams breaking and flooding and how we're going to handle that. Is that right?
Well, run out from the dike itself.
Well, I mean, the first thing is I'm just going to refer to this map because I think it'll help explain a lot about what we're trying to do here. The diking that we built, which is the diking around the lagoons and up lakes around next to Beverly behind the school. We talked about Fund Pacific and along Beverly Street, and in the future up the highway and across. We have no interest in encroaching on the marsh. We've done everything we can, as a matter of fact, to try to keep these dikes back and out of the marsh. One of the reasons we've done that is because we've got a problem. We've got a city that exists, and we're trying to protect it from flooding. We all remember the November 2009 flood. So we've got a responsibility to try to protect the urban core. On the other hand, we don't want to protect the urban core and build dikes out and cause harm to the marsh. We would prefer to build the dikes as close to the urban core as possible and allow the marsh to behave like a marsh. And so you'll notice that this dike is not along the creek. This dike we've had to put out there because we have a major sewage pump station there and we didn't want it flooding. We kept the dike along Beverly as much as we could. The CAO, David Van, explained why we had to do a shortcut here to try to save money because we had a budget of, it was actually $6.5 million and we got taken back to $5 million. We had to protect the school, so we kept it to their property line. The bus depot, we've explained why we went across here and we kept it back as tight to Beverly as possible. Over here, we've kept it as tight to the highway as possible. So where we can, we tried to keep the dikes back out of the marsh area as much as possible to allow it to be a marsh. What we'd like to see is some work done down in this area and further downstream where I talked about the two dikes that come together. Those two dikes pinch the river and cause the flows to back up and flood into this area more than they otherwise would. And I do agree that sediment is an issue in the river, and we've been involved in a sediment management project for the better part of 2 years now, and we'll be doing more next year to try to remove sediment from the river. Our preference would be not to build dikes, but unfortunately we're not able to get into the confluence area to try to remove material there and deal with the adjustment in the river that was made back in 1957, if I recall. So we can't get in here, we'd love to. We would like to see something done about the dikes downstream that pinch the river. But until such time as those things can be dealt with, we don't have much choice in terms of how we protect the urban core. But I hope that everybody can see from this map that we are doing everything we can to keep those dikes pulled back so that we're not encroaching into the marsh.
Can the pumps handle a microburst that Ladysmith had, or are we going to have a flood inside the walls?
So when you build a dike, you got to deal with the water that's accumulating behind it, and that's a good question. And what we do is you can't really see it because the quality of the video is not good, but we've actually built a pump station in here. So what will happen is that water will accumulate, flow to that pump station, and we'll have to pump it over. There's another pump station, flood pump station here, there's another flood pump station here, and there'll be a future one here. And we tried to size those appropriately to deal with peak flows that may come from heavy rain events.
Thank you. All right, I think we're going into the last 2 questions for the evening, and then we're going to wrap up. So over to microphone number 1, microphone number 2 on standby, and then we're going to turn to closing comments from our speakers. Oh, okay, maybe one.
Thank you, everybody, for being here. My name is Ted Leichner. I'm a retired agricultural instructor. I've taught ag chem, I've taught beekeeping, I taught applied ecology. So I very understand Somenos Marsh as far as wetlands. I basically lived in wetlands as a kid. Here's my concern about Somenos Marsh. Somenos Marsh is key habitat for native bees and honeybees. Let's put it into context. In the States, pollination is a matter of national priority. Millions of dollars have gone into restoring habitat. We can no longer rely on our honeybees. We need our native bees. To keep our native bees, we need habitat. A lot of that habitat is in the ALR. I'm also a beekeeper. Therefore, and I know, and Somenos Marsh provides a lot of resources for all our pollinators, honeybees and native bees. We have 200 species of native bees that we will need for future pollination of our food crops as we develop food production in the urban area around Somenos Marsh and in our agricultural areas. So we're dealing with important things in the marsh that we're not aware of. And it has to do with a special kind of resilience. We need, so basically, we need Somenos Marsh as habitat for pollinators, for food production, as well as biodiversity conservation. That's basically the message. I'm working with the Cowichan Land Trust Association. We got a grant for pollinator conservation education ready to go over this year. We're bringing technology from the Xerces Society for Invertebrate Conservation. They are the organization that restored agricultural habitat for native bees right across the states. So we have the extension and education program here in the Cowichan. It's just a matter of the planners and the farmers and the engineers to contact me, and we can get things going.
Okay, thank you very much for raising that. Over to microphone number 2.
My name is Randy Dome, and I came here thinking I'm not really affected by this, as I live, and don't laugh, on the high side of Seine Road. But what is this going to do to the water table and the well-drained soil that we have on the high side, up into the high side of Seine Road, up into the Timbercrest area, by having pushed the water higher up into our side of the creek?
Clayton, you going to handle that?
And so the question is how are we going to deal with water being pushed up on the higher side? On your side?
No, what's going to happen to the water table?
I don't think I can really answer that question. I mean, the water table, if you're meaning groundwater, there's not going to be any change due to the diking to groundwater levels, if that's your question.
There won't be any change to any of the drainage or the ground level water table?
No, I mean, the dikes that we've chosen to build, which I discussed previously, were built because, first of all, they protect the town, but we were relieved when we, from the modeling which demonstrated there wouldn't be any flood level increases. So in other words, the building of these dikes does not push water, surface water, levels higher in the Seine Road area or back into the marsh.
What about the underground water table?
Well, I mean, it's covered in surface water, so the groundwater is what the groundwater is.
Okay. Okay. So I did say that was it. I see something, a handful of people craning towards the microphones. You doing okay? I really appreciate all of your patience and you coming out tonight. There is one more person that I would like to have an opportunity to take to the microphone. That is the president of the Somenos Marsh Wildlife Society, who hasn't had a chance to speak tonight and was a driving force behind organizing this event and just disappeared from the line of the microphone. But Paul Fletcher.
Thanks, Tamara, and I apologize if I bumped anybody out. I wish we could go a few more hours because there's lots of people who still seem to have a strong opinion they wish to express. My main point is that there's a University Village process taking place. The lands in all between Beverly Street and the dike are identified as potential development land on the maps produced by the planning departments in North Cowichan. I'm extremely bothered by that because it's supposed to be an open process where everybody gets a say, but we're already being directed into the idea that it's open for development. It's not open for development. It should be protected as green space, including the Fun Pacific property. And I have to say something very important about that property. That property, as over the years, is worth money. And the owners of that property, I can't think of the word now, deserve adequate compensation for their loss, and they should sell it so that we can expand the marsh greater. We heard North Cowichan make a lot of promises tonight. They promised a conservation area. They promised an invasive species strategy. They talked about adding all those new pieces. They said, we might discuss that with the Marsh Society about putting those pieces in the conservation area. As far as I'm concerned, every green space that's left behind the dike and in front of the dike, between the dike and Beverly Street, must belong in the conservation area because we're losing land at an extremely fast rate. There's no reason to expand the urban containment boundary further than where it is. It's working great where it is. And that's really all I have to say. I care hugely deeply about the marsh. I care particularly about its spiritual values and its holistic values and its wildlife values. They're also broad, they're also important. I spend a lot of time down there, I meet a lot of people in the marsh, and they're so thankful for a quiet place to come and appreciate. They're not even thinking about the services that the marsh provides us. They just like that moment of spirituality and tranquility there. And we want to continue offering it to the people because one day this will be our Central Park. We're sitting here tonight looking at something that will be our Central Park, it'll be our Stanley Park, and people will thank these politicians in the future for leaving it that way. Thank you. Thank you very much.
So there has been some great conversation and interesting perspectives brought to the table this evening, and I will offer everyone on the panel an opportunity to close. But one of the things that I have noticed from an outsider's perspective, and one of the areas that I work in a lot, is complex issues. And it's very easy to take one thing and a really complex organism and sort of blend it all together. And what I have heard tonight, and what I hope that our decision makers have heard tonight, is that people care about every strand within this issue, within the exemption from the agricultural land reserve, the issues around property values, the issue around communication and the opportunity to be heard. We saw 300 people show up on a Saturday or on a Friday night to be heard, and the overwhelming support and concern for maintaining the integrity of the marsh and ecological services in this area. Have I missed anything? And hear ye for the salmon. So with that, I turn it back to John Lefebvre for a closing comment.
Thank you, Tamara. I'd like to thank everyone again for coming out tonight, and I appreciate your comments. I'm glad that we had a couple of members of council here to hear them. I would invite you to stay with any process. We're going to find out in a couple of weeks, probably, what the ALC ruling is going to be. Council has made a decision that they would like to consider the piece of land in question for the RCMP site. So I think your opinions and your concerns should be brought before council. We've certainly, those of us who are here, have heard them, but there's 4 other members of council who were not here tonight. So it's going to be important for you to follow along with the process, and I invite you to come to our council chambers during our decision-making process, to our public meetings, to discuss it and to give us your input. That's going to be really key to the final decision. And I would also like to say there's a lot of discussion of the dikes here tonight, and I didn't hear a lot of concern for the persons who were affected by the flooding in 2009. So I wasn't on council, the last council, when they made the decision to move ahead with the diking, but I do support what they did. And it's our response to a situation to look after our citizens. And as a member of council, you have to consider a number of interests, and the environment is one of those interests. The safety and well-being of our residents is another consideration. How we're going to pay for everything we try and do, that's another consideration. So council has to balance all of those, and that makes decision-making more complicated and difficult, and doesn't always make everyone happy. We know that for sure. So please stay with the process, and just a reminder that you can go to our website, www.northcowichan.ca. We have a notifications button there, and you can sign up for it. Plus, you can go to the website and you can watch archived or current council meetings. But for you really to have input, we need you to come out to our meetings and express yourself. And we have a special spot on the agenda so that you can speak to council. So my final request is please stay with the process, make your feelings known. There are still decisions to be made. I should say, if the ALC refuses us the exclusion, I believe that will be the end of any discussion of an RCMP site, because it can't happen without that exclusion. So thank you very much.
Tim Koshinski, would you like to make any? Yes.
All our council meetings, all the decisions that have made in this so far, from when council decided to ask staff to proceed, are public, and all the public is welcome.
All right, you two. Don't make me separate you. Oh, wait. Okay. Is there anybody else from the table at the front who would like to make a closing comment? Let me phrase it that way. Tim? Yes. Closing.
First of all, actually, I would really like to raise my hands in the whole community. When we raise our hands, it's not just a simple sign of thank you, but it's a humbling statement of appreciation. I really appreciate the fact that I'm actually sitting in this room on a panel talking about the things that we're talking about. I would like to make a request, and that is for people to keep in mind that yes, we're here talking about Somenos Marsh, and we're here talking about the dikes that are affecting it. But I would like people to also appreciate the fact that we're also dealing with an accumulation of factors that have impacted the area over the last 145 years. So 40 years ago, you know, there was a number of processes that was sort of underway that resulted in some fairly major impacts to the Cowichan system. Prior to that, Cowichan Bay Road, the railway bridge, Trans-Canada Highway, Zuhalem Road, basically are all dikes. If you look prior to 145 years ago, there's the beautifully drawn map showing the Cowichan system. And the whole lower end, actually I'll say lower end, from what we call the White Ridge down to the estuary, is an incredible network of systems, of side channels and tributaries that ran throughout the valley bottom into the estuary. In 145 years ago, on that map, it shows the villages of the Cowichan community. And the villages, several of which were on what we now call Touchy Island, so the bridge, the landmass between Pembury Bridge, or the bridge below the Stone Church, and what we call Plumlets, or the Clem Bridge, near the Doman's Mill. There were villages on that stretch. At the moment, it's in many instances, it's difficult to farm there because of the level of flooding and the impacts from the system. During the time of those villages, those were year-round villages. It wasn't that flooding didn't occur, but it was a natural system. The natural flushing and management of the system was such that flooding was really not the issue it is today. I mention that because over my lifetime, not to mention my uncle the Stream's lifetime, I've seen a huge change. I grew up in the Coxsila system. Now, admittedly, the Coxsila system is a much flashier system, but in my lifetime, or in our family home in the Coxsila system, could be inundated at any time during the winter months with 4 to even 6 feet of water. The flashiness, so within the period of about 10 or 15 years, instead of 4 sort of solid days of rain, a high tide, and completely saturated ground, being indicators that there's real potential for a flood. By the end of our sort of first 15-year stay, it got to the point where we could have a flood in a single rain event, and it would be a fairly notable flood. So those are moderate floods. I raise those issues because 110 years ago, the practice within forestry, and please if Don or anybody else will sort of reflect on the details there, but 110 years ago, one of the practices was to dam up the Cowichan Lake with logs that were harvested farther up in the valley, and then dynamite them and run the logs through the Cowichan River. That basically completely scoured the river bottom and nearly destroyed the salmon runs at that time. And there was a contingent of Cowichan chiefs, community members, that actually went to England to petition the Crown at that time for changes in those practices. I mention those practices because it's all those accumulated effects that have led us to where we are now. It's worth noting that the one bridge in this valley that actually meets the 200-year flood level requirement is the Pembury Bridge down below the Stone Church. So for anybody that drives over the Pembury Bridge, you'll note that after you get over the Pembury Bridge, there's a pretty dramatic drop on either side. In the event of a flood, if you happen to be on that bridge, you'll be safe. But you're going to stay there until the flood is over. I do say that, though, because really, in my mind, especially considering the values that we now know today, tried and truly, I think we all have to change our thoughts and our practices to fully take into consideration the real disparity of views. Coming and sitting at forums like this is really important, but we have to take those messages home to all of our community members here in the valley. I say that, and I fully appreciate the fact that people want a dry house. I say that, though, because our family home in the Cook's Island system, when we arrived there, would be inundated in the winter with 2 to 3 feet of water inside the house. After the first couple of winters, we developed the resources to actually lift the house up on stilts, and for the remainder of the use of that house, it's remained out of the flood level. But all of the surrounding area is completely inundated by water.
Tim, can I get you to wrap up?
Sorry. Just to finish, I had the first car that I owned was actually filled to the roof with flood water. I say that because many members on the reserve dealt with those same issues. So I had finished high school and was heading to work in the flood when I was quite surprised getting to the Trans-Canada Highway to see a police officer come racing up with his lights on. And he come running out and he asked if everybody was okay. And I kind of looked back and he asked if everybody was out. And I was dumbfounded. I had no idea what he was asking. So he asked if people had made it out of the flood. And I kind of looked at him with real surprise, and I let him know that my uncle was home, but if he needed to make it to town, he would walk out and get to his vehicle and go to town. I told him that my mother was home, and he kind of looked at me, really shocked because there was absolutely no concern on my face. I reiterated that she had enough food and water. We made our provisions and we were prepared for the floods. I say that because it's a very, very different era, I guess, in my mind, and really a very different mentality. Lastly, sorry to finish, I'm trying to move along. I really have to give people like Leschim a huge amount of credit. It was Leschim himself that ensured that the span on the Pembury Bridge was far enough to give the river some freedom. Now, and I'm you know, trying to just inform the process. At the time, we were told there was absolutely no way to build that bridge far enough. Wasn't really what, you know, what he had wanted, because he didn't want any restriction on the lower end. But we've so impacted the flow of the system. Small little steps, like giving the river some freedom, they do come at a cost, but in the long run, if we can plan as far as we can ahead, we really will get more of our money's worth. Now I say that because, and I give Lishtim a lot of credit, he and I visited Richmond, visiting one of a site near our village on the Fraser, Tlactinis, and there was a high-rise that was 9 stories, 10 stories tall, and it had recently been built within a 2 or 3 year period to the time we visited, and it had been built to grade. It was right near a section of the Fraser River. We were told by one of the municipal representatives, actually I think a municipal engineer in Richmond, that they were having to raise that dike 1.6 meters. That high-rise building was instantaneously, overnight, determined to be at a real flood risk. So in full respect, the flood management plan is a really good document. It has setback dikes. It has a number of steps in place, but at the moment, we don't have the money. So we have to take some time, I think, to look down the road. With that, I raise my hands again.
Thank you very much, Tim. Phil, would you like to close?
I've got a couple of very short things. One, I would like to thank all of the people on this panel. I would like to thank the staff from North Cowichan, each and every one of you, those who had to leave early. The wisdom of a community is beyond just the technicians, the politicians, and the organizations. The wisdom of a community is the mind of the community for now and into the future. We are hearing from that wisdom that is our community. Today, when I was visiting my sister-in-law and her husband, she is dying of cancer, they told me that even though she's been weak and not able to get out and about much, they spent an hour at the open-air classroom to find peace and to restore their soul. Thank you.
I'm just thankful that Paul and the Somenos Marsh Committee have provided this opportunity, and thank you also to the panel to be here and the participants for speaking up.
David Polster.
Yeah, I just wanted to reiterate the concern about whether we're building resilient communities. If we focus on narrow things like dike alignments and stuff like that, we miss the bigger picture that, you know, okay, so what happens if the river decides to reoccupy the oxbow, the ancient oxbow that is currently Centennial Park? That'd be pretty exciting, wouldn't it?
Dan Ferguson.
Yeah, I'd like to say that I think our elected representatives in municipalities and regional districts are given the responsibility to lead by example. And in this case, the example needs to be preservation and the reserve for our future generations and the ability to feed themselves. It's the most precious resource we can give them. Thank you.
I want to add a couple of things to what Dan was just saying. I spent the whole evening here and haven't said my favorite thing, and that's food. The idea of taking land in today's world out of the ALR and putting some kind of commercial buildings on them, it is absolutely appalling. We need food. We need to expand our local food production. And North Cowichan is not doing a heck of a lot to help that. There's a piece of land that is between Beverly Street and the dike. There's an organization in the town here who asked North Cowichan if we could build an incubator farm there where we could train young people to farm and market food. They said no, they're going to develop it. What kind of thinking is this? I don't know. How did we get these people running things here?
And one more for the salmon, Brian Teddy.
I'd like to thank Paul Fletcher for putting most of the years I've been around here, putting his years into the Marsh. Paul gave you a soundbite that I would have, if I could have thought of it. This is your Central Park in the future, or at least your children's. If you don't design it now and set some parameters for its design and its function and its enjoyment, you will get a New York City without a Central Park. Thank you.
Thanks to all of you. Thank you to all of our speakers. I have a parting gift for you. I have no Vanna, so I'll walk them around to you myself. But thank you to the audience and to our speakers for coming out tonight. Mayor Lippiger offered or incited you all to follow along in the process, and I think what we have done in showing up this evening is to direct the process and to get directly involved in our parliamentary, our democratic processes. This is incredibly powerful, and I am so thankful to each of you for being here and for taking action and making your voices heard. Next week, the Agricultural Land Commission reviews the decision, or makes their decision on the exclusion of this piece of land. There are postcards at the front that you can sign and send. There are letters you can write, emails you can submit, phone calls you can make. The power is in your hands. Please continue to use it. Thank you.